There's no escaping that it's been another challenging year for the tech industry globally, and Europe's not been immune to that. Yeah. As you pointed out, investment levels down to 45 billion. But I think, as always, you need to sort of move beyond the headline number and dig beneath that to get a sense of what's really going on. And I think, when you look at when did the drop happen, that was in Q2 last year. Since then, we've now had 5-6 quarters of stable levels of investment. In fact, in the most recent period, even signs of a little uptick. And though the decline has been almost entirely led by the growth stages, at the early stages, we're seeing incredible robustness there.
That's so interesting. One other element of the report that stood out to me is that American and Asian investors have started to retreat. So is the source of this funding being shifted more towards European investors at this point?
So in last year's report, we started to see that the global retraction of investment had shifted flows of capital between regions. And one of the things we were starting to see was US investors participating in fewer rounds, their share of capital invested declining. And that has been the same story this year again. And really that's been led by a sharp pullback in terms of activity from crossover investors. These investors active in the public and the private markets. And just to put some numbers around that, in 2021, there's a cohort of those investors. They did over 100 new investments in Europe that year. This year, we've seen that decline to less than a handful.
When it comes to investing in Europe and choosing Europe as your place of choice, if you're a company owner, a founder, or an investor, access to capital is often cited as one of the key reasons why investors and companies opt for the US over Europe. Are you seeing that change, access to capital become easier, more robust?
There's just been huge change in the ecosystem over 2 decades now. And one of the things that's interesting is that actually when it comes to new tech startup formation, Europe's been exceeding the US for a number of years now. But as you point out, access to capital is an area where there's work to be done. And actually in the report, we talk about a $1 trillion capital gap. If you look at assets under management from asset managers in the US and in Europe, you look at their alternatives AUM, and then you look at the share going to VC, the gap is equivalent to almost $1 trillion. So that's the gap that needs to be bridged. Now, of course, we're seeing huge progress there, to seek to do that. But this is why we say this is the moment to embrace risk. The ecosystem's fundamentals are incredibly strong talent base, huge activity in terms of companies being started. But, obviously, still things we need to do to realize the full potential.
Clearly, it's on top of mind for governments. Jumana was just at a global investment summit here in the UK yesterday, I think, aimed in large part on bringing tech investment into this country. One of the other things that stuck out to me from your report is the interest in AI, which I think will come as no surprise. But looking at the size of the funding rounds that a lot of the AI companies have engaged in, we're still looking at very small companies compared to the pioneers in this space. So is it realistic to think that Europe can compete with the giants in the US when it comes to AI?
It's a great question. And I think, of course, you couldn't talk about the report this year without bringing up AI. I think, what did we see? So at the early stages, AI, clearly number one investment theme, huge proliferation in terms of early stage companies there. We also saw that AI has become a dominant theme at the growth stages. So whilst the number of 100 million rounds is down a lot, actually AI is 30% of those in Europe this year. But yes, a long way to go to fill the capital gap versus the US. That being said, when it comes to AI talent, this is where Europe has an edge. Actually, one of the things that we quantified is, where around the world are highly skilled AI professionals working? And there are more in Europe than there are in the US. And that number has grown 10x in the last decade. So that is such a strong foundation from which we will see, future European AI champions emerge.
On another note, one thing that stood out to me is you have a page in your report that lists the top 5 themes by the number of new joiners. And I thought it was interesting that even though we talk a lot about AI, sustainability and climate is still at the top. Very interesting given some of the backlash that ESG investing has had over the last couple of years. So what do you make of that as well?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that up because it was such an interesting trend. So one of the things that we've tried to do is map, what have proven to be magnetic areas, themes for people joining the tech industry. And I think what we see in those numbers is a determination amongst European talent to work on the big problems that we face, be that climate, be it health. And that's really reflected, in terms of what we're seeing being the big pull effects, for people changing roles now.